Chapter 15 The Mad King's Fall. The drive south to Tagaytay took 2 agonizing hours. Inside the heavily dented gray sedan, the silence was suffocating. The torrential rain hammered against the roof, mirroring the chaotic collapse of the empire they had left burning in Manila. Mateo Reyes sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly through the rain-streaked window. The adrenaline had slowly given way to a numb, heavy exhaustion. Halfway out of the city, June abruptly pulled the car off the road, parking it in the broken shadow of an abandoned, rust-eaten gas station. He killed the engine, leaving only the sound of the relentless rain hammering against the steel roof. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For the first time in years, the brutal, deafening noise of their empire was silent. Mateo slowly pushed open his door and stepped out into the freezing deluge, letting the rain wash the dark, sticky blood from his knuckles. He leaned against the rusted shell of a gas pump, staring back at the faint, orange glow of Manila burning against the night sky. In a matter of hours, their entire reality had been severed. Millions of pesos, thousands of men, perfectly bribed politicians, all of it shattered. Mateo closed his eyes, inhaling the smell of wet concrete and gasoline, suddenly remembering the cold, desperate nights in Tonda before he had ever touched Marco's money. He felt an undeniable, profound sense of absolute emptiness. The empire was gone. Only the predators remained. After 10 hollow minutes of simply breathing, June quietly rolled down the driver's side window. "Teo," June said softly, nodding to the dashboard. Mateo walked back to the car. According to the police scanners crackling through the radio, Special Agent Navarro and the NBI had successfully raided all 3 BGC nightclubs, seized over $1 billion pesos in assets, and arrested Senator Velasco at his private residence. The meticulously woven net of corruption that Marco had spent years building was cleanly dismantled in a single evening. "We hit them back," Marco hissed, throwing a dead satellite phone at the floorboards. He leaned forward, his blood-stained bespoke suit clinging to his shaking frame. "Navarro wants a war. We give him a war. We have 30 armed contractors at the mansion. We rally the Ascals. We ambush the NBI convoy on EDSA while they transport the seized cash. We kill Navarro in the street. We take our money back." Mateo didn't turn around. He just watched the dark mountain highway unravel ahead of them. "You can't shoot the federal government, Marco," Mateo said, his voice calm. "The police precinct was on our payroll. The NBI operates directly under the president. You hit a federal convoy, they won't just arrest us. They will call in the military and carpet bomb the mountain. I am not running into the jungle to hide like a savage." Marco roared, kicking the back of Mateo's seat. "I built the entire modern underworld. I own this country." June caught Mateo's eye in the rearview mirror. June's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. The unspoken communication between the 2 street orphans was clear. A trapped animal was dangerous, but a trapped, delusional animal was a fatal liability. The sedan crested the ridge, finally pulling through the electrified gates of Marco's Tagaytay mansion. The 3-story fortress of imported glass and black steel stood ominously against the stormy sky. Tall Lake was invisible in the heavy fog below. The estate was in a state of high alert. The remaining private military contractors Marco had hired were pacing the driveway with suppressed rifles, clearly spooked by the news updates flooding their radios. Mateo, June, and Marco stepped out into the freezing mountain wind. "Lock the gates." Marco immediately brayed at the lead contractor, marching toward the front doors. "Arm the perimeter. Set up heavy machine gun nests on the balcony. If anyone wearing a badge approaches the property line, you shred them. Do you understand?" The mercenaries exchanged nervous, uncertain glances, but they nodded and racked their weapons. Inside, the colossal glass living room felt like a mausoleum. The grand piano sat abandoned. The silver platters of cocaine from weeks prior were long gone. Marco immediately stormed over to the antique crystal drink cart, his hands shaking as he poured a glass of scotch. Mateo walked slowly into the center of the room. June positioned himself quietly near the heavy oak doors, his hand resting casually on the grip of his pistol. 6 Askell enforcers filed into the room behind June, their clothes soaked with rain, their faces hardened into stone. "Drink, Teo," Marco commanded, downing half his glass in a single, desperate swallow. He gestured wildly to the cart. "Drink. Then call your lieutenants in Tonda. I want 50 men up here by dawn. We are going to fortify this ridge and turn it into a meat grinder." Mateo didn't move toward the cart. He remained still in the center of the Persian rug. "There is no counterattack, Marco," Mateo said softly. Marco stopped pouring. He slowly turned around, the crystal decanter still in his hand. The manic energy in his eyes sharpened into something cold and venomous. "Excuse me?" Marco whispered. "The Empire is dead," Mateo stated, his tone devoid of any emotion. He was laying out the hard math of survival. Navarro seized the books. "Velasco is singing to the feds right now to save his own life. By sunrise, there will be a nationwide manhunt for both of us. Fortifying a glass mansion against the military isn't a strategy. It's a mass suicide." "I give the orders," Marco snapped, his voice echoing loudly in the space. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Mateo's chest. "You are muscle, Mateo. You are a street rat I pulled out of the gutter and dressed in a nice watch. You don't make the strategic calls. You point the gun where I tell you to point it." Mateo felt a deep, profound exhaustion settle into his bones. He looked at the man he had built an empire with. They had started side by side, carefully conquering the shadows. But the money had mutated Marco. Marco had started believing his own myth. He had become the one thing Mateo had sworn never to tolerate, a liability. "I'm not pointing the gun at the military," Mateo said. "I am taking the Askells, dumping the phones, and disappearing. The partnership is over." Mateo turned his back on Marco and took a deliberate step toward the door. "Stop right there!" Marco shrieked. Mateo didn't stop. "Guards!" Marco roared, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Guards! Arrest him! Arrest this ungrateful rat!" 4 armed private military contractors stepped into the living room from the adjacent hallway, raising their assault rifles. They were highly paid professionals, loyal purely to the offshore bank accounts Marco claimed to control. They leveled their sights squarely on Mateo's back. The tension in the glass room snapped like a steel cable. Instantly, June and the 6 Askells drew their weapons. They didn't aim at Marco. They aimed directly at the 4 contractors. A deadly, silent standoff locked the room in ice. The contractors had the tactical gear and the military training. But the Askells had hungry, feral eyes. They were boys born in the blood-stained gutters of Tonda who had already survived the worst horrors the world had to offer. None of them flinched. They were fully prepared to die in this room. Mateo slowly turned around, looking past the raised rifles of the contractors to stare directly into Marco's eyes. "Your accounts are frozen, Marco," Mateo said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. He looked at the lead contractor. "The man writing your checks just lost his bank. If you pull those triggers, my boys will ensure none of you walk out of this house alive. You are professionals. Die for a cause, die for a country, but do not die for a bounced check." The lead contractor swallowed hard. He looked at Marco's ruined suit and manic, sweating face, then looked at the unwavering, dead eyes of June. The math was clear. Slowly, deliberately, the lead contractor lowered his rifle. He nodded to his men. But they didn't just walk out the door. The lead contractor walked explicitly over to Marco, gripping Marco's lapel and tossing him against the wall like a ragdoll. "The keys to the Mercedes," the contractor growled, pressing a combat knife against Marco's throat. "And the passcode to the wall vault in the master bedroom." I know about the gold, Marco. We are taking our severance package right now, or we splatter your brains across this glass. Marco, shivering and humiliated in front of his former enforcers, whimpered the combination and handed over his keys. The mercenaries stripped him of his Rolex, looted the upstairs safe in under 4 minutes, and abandoned the sinking ship, their tires squealing as they fled into the storm. Marco watched his expensive shield evaporate, replaced by a brutal robbery. His jaw trembled. The crystal decanter slipped from his hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. The expensive scotch pooled around his Italian leather shoes. You! Marco stammered, backing up against the glass window that overlooked the pitch-black abyss of Tall Lake. You can't do this. I made you. I gave you everything. You gave me a target on my back, Mateo corrected, stepping slowly toward the terrified billionaire. You got arrogant. You started making noise. You killed Hector Cruz just so you could watch him drown, and you left a trail of blood that led the government right to our front door. Marco pressed his back against the cold glass. The manic fury was gone, replaced by animal panic. He looked frantically at June, then at the Ascals. None of them moved. They belonged to Mateo. Teo, please, Marco begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic, wet whisper. He raised his hands defensively. We can fix this. I have stash houses. Diamonds in safety deposit boxes. We take a boat to Taiwan. We start over. Mateo stopped 3 feet away from his former partner. He reached into his dark windbreaker. He didn't pull out a gun. Mateo pulled out a small, unmarked glass vial filled with a slightly viscous, clear liquid. Marco stared at the vial. All the color instantly drained from his face. It was the highly concentrated neuromuscular blocker. The blue-ringed octopus toxin his chemist had manufactured. The exact same poison he had poured down Hector Cruz's throat 3 weeks ago. You brought a lot of heat down on us, Marco, Mateo said softly, turning the small vial over in his fingers. Navarro isn't going to stop hunting us until he delivers a kingpin to the president. He needs a mastermind. He needs a body. I didn't come to this mansion to fight a war, Marco. I came to deliver the scapegoat. Marco shook his head, backing against the cold glass. What, how long? How long have I had this vial in my pocket? Mateo interrupted quietly. Since the night you drowned Hector Cruz holding back his antidote. You proved to me exactly what kind of partner you were that night. So, the next morning, I paid your chemist a very quiet, very expensive visit. He synthesized a special batch just for me. You see, I knew this empire would eventually burn, Marco, and I planned on being the one holding the fire extinguisher. Marco stumbled further, tripping over the heavy oak coffee table and slamming his shoulder into the ground. He realized with absolute, horrifying clarity that Mateo had plotted his assassination for weeks while playing the loyal subordinate. I can give you my offshore accounts. Marco shrieked, crawling backward on his hands and knees like a coward. 100 million pesos in Zurich. You want to be the invisible king of Manila? You'll need seed money. I can write you the digital transfer codes right now. I swear to God. Mateo uncorked the vial with his thumb. He stepped in close and poured the bitter, viscous liquid directly to the back of Marco's throat. Swallow, Mateo whispered. Marco choked, a desperate, gargling sob tearing from his chest as his reflexes forced the liquid down. June immediately released him. Marco collapsed onto the floor, clawing desperately at his own throat. The transition was horrific and absolute. Marco convulsed, knocking over the heavy crystal drink cart. He slammed onto the floorboards among the broken glass, his body seizing uncontrollably. Thick, white foam bubbled rapidly from his lips. His vocal cords paralyzed, forcing a wet, unnatural rasp from his throat as he desperately tried to drag air into his freezing lungs. Mateo stood over him, watching the violent, ugly reality of the neurotoxin claim its architect. Within 40 seconds, the thrashing reduced to rigid, painful tremors. Marco's muscles locked. He lay trapped on his back, physically paralyzed from the neck down. His chest barely rose. But his eyes wide, bloodshot, and filled with primal terror darted frantically up at Mateo. He was trapped inside his own body. Fully awake. Fully aware. Mateo knelt down beside Marco, ignoring the broken glass. He leaned in close to Marco's flushed, frozen, panicked face. "If I shoot you, the NBI will just keep looking for the man who pulled the trigger," Mateo explained quietly, his voice cutting through the sound of the raging storm outside. "But if they find the infamous Marco Dizon paralyzed in his mountain fortress, they will declare a total victory. The president gets his headline. Navarro gets a medal. And the street rat from Tonda fades quietly back into the shadows." Marco's eyes screamed. They begged. They wept. He was waiting to use the one weapon he had left, his voice. The moment the poison wore off, he would sing to the NBI. He would give them Mateo's name, June's name, and every single Askel safe house in Tonda. Mateo saw the calculation in the Mad King's eyes. "You're thinking about the antidote," Mateo whispered, shaking his head slowly. "You're thinking about what happens when the localized paralysis breaks in 2 hours. But I didn't give you the standard dose, Marco. I visited your disgraced chemist 3 days ago and had him chemically concentrate the batch. Don't worry about Navarro finding him, by the way. Your chemist, along with your corrupt customs broker, Santos, was sent to the bottom of Manila Bay yesterday." The bloodshot terror in Marco's eyes spiked. "The dose I just gave you is going to aggressively damage the motor cortex of your brain," Mateo said, leaving his voice devoid of mercy. "The paralysis isn't temporary. You aren't going to wake up in a hospital and cut a plea deal with Agent Navarro. You are going to be trapped inside your own skull for the rest of your natural life. A perfect, silent scapegoat." Marco was powerless, experiencing an infinite, permanent version of the exact nightmare he had inflicted upon his rivals. "Enjoy the dark, Marco," Mateo whispered softly. Mateo stood up and turned away. He reached into his coat, pulled out a prepaid cell phone he had taken from one of the fleeing mercenaries, and dialed a number he had memorized from the police scanners. It rang twice before a stern voice answered. "NBI tip line. Special Agent Navarro is looking for the head of the snake," Mateo said, leaving his voice dead and flat. "He's at the Tagaytay Ridge estate. Send the tactical units now, before he stops breathing." Mateo hung up the phone. He looked at June and the Askels, giving a single, decisive nod. "Wipe the security servers," Mateo ordered, his voice echoing in the grand, empty house. "We leave in 2 minutes. We go back to Tonda. We go underground." Mateo walked out of the glass living room and stepped onto the misty front portico. The lead mercenary contractor raised his rifle, aiming at Mateo's chest. Mateo didn't flinch. He reached into his customized black duffel bag and tossed 2 heavy, brick-like bundles of 1,000 peso bills over the railing. They landed at the contractor's combat boots. "Marco is finished inside," Mateo said, leaving his voice flat. "NBI assault teams are exactly 4 minutes out. The master vault upstairs is practically open." The contractor lowered his rifle, staring at the cash, the math clicking in his head. Loyalty was expensive, but survival was priceless. He grabbed his radio. "Stand down the perimeter. We're bleeding the house and bugging out." As the mercenaries rushed inside to strip their fallen king of anything not nailed down, Mateo and his crew slipped into the dark tree line, leaving the broken architect of Manila waiting in paralyzed terror for the sirens to arrive. The deafening roar of the mountain storm swallowed them whole as they descended the ridge. For the first time in years, the intoxicating, chaotic noise of the empire was completely gone. Mateo looked back once through the rain, watching the shadows consume the glass palace he had helped build. He didn't feel the breathless rush of triumph he had always imagined when taking the throne. He felt only a cold, crushing exhaustion. The sprawling kingdom they had bled for was an illusion, the only thing real was the poison left on the floor.